Let's be real. Buying a house is probably the biggest financial decision you'll ever make, and it can be, well, terrifying. It's filled with what-ifs and so much uncertainty. But what if you had a contractual safety net, a way to protect yourself from really expensive surprises? Well, you do. They're called contingencies, and they are without a doubt the single most important tool you have as a homebuyer. So let's break down exactly how they work.
So here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. First up, we'll talk about why you even need this safety net in the first place. Then we'll dive into the big 3 contingencies that every single buyer should know about. After that, we'll get into some more advanced, kind of specific examples. We'll walk through how the whole process actually plays out, and then we'll wrap it all up with a solid checklist you can use to protect yourself.
All right, let's set the stage. You've finally found it, the house you absolutely love. But along with all that excitement, that little voice in the back of your head starts whispering, right? What if there's some huge hidden problem? What if my loan falls through at the very last second? What if I find out something about this place I just can't live with?
And look, this isn't just theory, okay? Check out this post from a real homebuyer on Reddit. They're just a month away from closing, and they suddenly discover a massive issue with the home's solar panels. They're in a really tough spot, and their only hope is a specific little clause they put in their contract. This is where things get very, very real.
And that clause is a contingency. So what is it? Simply put, a contingency is a condition in your purchase contract that has to be met for the sale to be final. You should really think of it as your contractual escape hatch. It gives you the legal power to back out of the deal, and crucially, get your deposit back if something goes wrong. Now, you can technically create a contingency for almost anything, but most deals really revolve around 3 core protections. These are the absolute must-haves for pretty much every buyer out there. Let's start with the one you've probably heard of.
Okay, the classic fear, right? You've walked through the house, it looks fantastic, but what's hiding behind the drywall? Or under the crawl space? What happens if a professional inspector comes in and finds, I don't know, a cracked foundation or a totally outdated electrical system?
This is exactly what the inspection contingency is for. It gives you a specific amount of time to get the property checked out by a pro. And if that report comes back with stuff you're just not okay with, you've got options. You can ask the seller to fix it, you can negotiate for a lower price to cover the repairs, or if you can't come to an agreement, you can just walk away.
Here's another scenario that keeps buyers up at night. You and the seller agree on a price. You're all set. But then your lender sends their appraiser out, and the appraisal comes back lower than what you offered. Now the bank won't give you the full loan amount. What happens then?
Well, the appraisal contingency swoops in to save the day here. If the appraisal comes in low, this clause gives you the right to go back to the seller and try to renegotiate the price down to what the bank says it's worth. If the seller just won't budge, you can cancel the whole contract. So it's a huge deal. It protects you from being forced to overpay.
And the last piece of this big 3 puzzle is all about financing. Because you know that pre-approval letter you got? It's not a golden ticket. It's not a final guarantee. Things happen. A job change, a dip in your credit score, or even just a problem at the lender's office can derail your loan, even at the last minute. And that's why the financing contingency is so important. It basically says your offer is dependent on you actually getting the loan. If, for whatever reason, your financing falls through within a certain time frame, you can cancel the contract. And here's the most important part. You get your earnest money deposit back.
Okay, so those 3 are the basics, the absolute foundation. But this is where contingencies get really powerful, when you start tailoring them to a very specific property. Let's dig into some more advanced tools in your toolkit.
Let's circle back to our friend on Reddit and their solar panel problem. The whole thing hinges on one critical question. Are those panels owned or are they leased? If the seller owns them, they're just another part of the house, like the furnace, no big deal. But if they're leased, you're not actually buying panels, you're inheriting a long-term contract. You'll literally need a credit check just to take over the lease, and then you're stuck with whatever its terms are. A smart buyer would have put in a contingency specifically to review and approve that lease agreement. And I think it's important to see what this looks like in the real world. This isn't just a handshake deal or a verbal agreement. It's a legally binding addendum that gets attached right to your contract. You can see this example here is for a septic system, and it spells out exactly what needs to happen for the deal to keep moving forward.
And if you look closer at that septic contingency, you can see just how detailed it gets. It doesn't just say, check the septic. Nope. It specifies that the seller is responsible for hiring a qualified professional to have the tank pumped, and then that pro has to inspect it and confirm it's working normally. Once this is in the contract, it's not a suggestion, it's a requirement.
And trust me, things can get even more specialized. In many parts of the country, especially out west, owning a piece of land doesn't automatically mean you own the right to use the water on it. Water rights are often governed by a rule called prior appropriation, which is basically a fancy way of saying first in time, first in right. In a drought, someone with an older, senior right gets all their water before you get a single drop. A water rights contingency would give you the time to verify the property's legal right to water, which could be an absolute deal breaker. So, you've made your contingent offer, the seller has accepted it, awesome. But what happens next? How do you actually put all these protections to work? Let's walk through the timeline. Everything really happens within a specific window of time called the due diligence period. Think of this as your contractually agreed upon time. Maybe it's 10 days, maybe it's 3 weeks, to do all of your homework. This is when you're scheduling inspections, reviewing all the documents, confirming your financing. This period is basically your official license to investigate. Now, during this time, you're going to hear about two different kinds of money, and you really need to know the difference. Earnest money is your good faith deposit. It's held by a neutral third party, and it's almost always refundable if you back out for a reason that's covered by one of your contingencies. A due diligence fee, though, which is common in some states, is totally different. It's a non-refundable payment you make directly to the seller just for taking their house off the market for you. You will not get that fee back, even if you walk away for a good reason.
So the process really flows like this. First, your offer gets accepted. Second, you use that due diligence period to get all your contingency work done. The inspection, the appraisal, all that stuff. Third, based on what you find, you resolve everything, you either negotiate, decide to move forward, or you cancel the contract. And finally, once all the conditions are met, you close the sale and get the keys.
That brings us to our final section, how to really make the most of your due diligence period. Think of this as your action plan to make sure you don't miss anything that could come back to bite you. Here are the absolute non-negotiables. You have to get a professional home inspection. You need a title search done to make sure the property is actually free of any weird claims or liens. You should personally review the appraisal report. Don't just assume it's all good. Read every single page of the seller's disclosures. And please, confirm that the local zoning laws actually let you use the property the way you plan to. And while you're doing all that, you have to be on the lookout for specific red flags. If a seller claims a water source but there's no permit on file, that's a huge problem. Same thing if well tests come back showing it doesn't produce enough water, or if agreements for a shared well or driveway are super vague. And discovering the property is in a closed basin where you can't get new water rights, that could be an instant deal killer.
In the end, it all comes down to this one question. Falling in love with a house is the easy part, but finding the hidden problems, the real, actual deal breakers, that takes work. Your contingencies aren't just boring legal jargon. They are your magnifying glass, your flashlight, and your shield. They are the only tool you have to turn a house you love into a home you can be truly confident in.